Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, EmeraldPlanet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the EmeraldPlanet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello and welcome to you from Washington, D.C. as we come looking at the EmeraldPlanet, looking into 143 different nations, determining what is the best processes, the products, the technologies, and the people that can bring about change and also to address what is going on with climate change. And we're talking about a very special event that's coming up. Normally we're not talking about the events that are coming on, but this is something that's very special. This is the International Water Summit, or the International Summit on Water in Developing Countries. And so we're looking around the globe in about 200 nations now at water in the developed and the developing world. And so you're going to be absolutely amazed at some of the photographs you're going to be seeing and the people that we're going to be interviewing. And I have Don Marx, who is the president, and I must say a good friend through Rotary International, Rotary Club of Washington, D.C., and also he is the founder and creator of the International Water Summit. So, Don, welcome.
Thank you, Sam.
And I have to say, you're just back from Bogota, Colombia, so you really are a jet setter these days.
Yes, very much.
Well, tell us about the International Water Summit for developing countries, and what was kind of the impetus for getting all this started?
Well, we had actually two driving forces. One, being in Washington, we wanted to do something in Rotary that would take us to the next level. And water is an extremely important topic. As you're probably well aware, polio is the premier topic for Rotary for the last 20 years, and we spent some $900 million and billions of man-hours in eradicating polio for the planet. And so water is our next big challenge.
I think this is going to be fantastic. I understand this time that we're going from about $1 billion, maybe $5 billion from Rotary itself. And then, of course, I think that match is, what, about 5 to 1. So this is going to be a huge project in water once this really gets kicked into high gear. But you need to be commended on all this, and I know that Rotary International President has already said that this is really kind of the next step, the next level, if you will, as far as looking at water and Rotary and the relationships that we're going to have with many of the international nonprofits and also governmental agencies. So this is really an important development. So looking at who's going to participate in all this?
Well, it's an interesting cast. Our basic theme was to make sure that we tapped into the thinking and the needs in the developing countries. So we first invited the ambassadors. We have some 50 ambassadors to the United States who will participate in this activity. And not just simply participate, they will be speakers in forums. Each ambassador will host a table and a discussion.
That's at the banquet that's going to happen on April the 15th.
Yes, actually during the summit itself. So it's an exciting time, and we also, our format is one of basically listen to the needs in the morning from the ambassadors and from some 40-plus nations beyond that, and then in the afternoon the response. So we'll hear perspectives from the national level, the global level, the international NGO level, and even corporate America.
Well, I just think it's absolutely fantastic. Let's bring up one of these first slides that Don provided for us, give it a little background, and we're just going to kind of let this go in the background, Don, as you and I are chatting here. But looking at this whole notion of water, there's more to that. You know, every time you create new water sources, of course, it's sanitation issues, and then we have the global climate change is going on. How you're balancing all this with the water and these other acute needs going on in the developing world?
Well, we recognized when we started the Water Summit that it was integral to water and sanitation. We picked water because, one, it actually is a little easier problem to resolve than is the sanitation. There's some 1 billion people without access to safe drinking water. But there's some 3 billion people that don't have sanitation services.
It's just incredible. Half of the world's population, there's roughly 7 billion people on this planet, and half do not have access to adequate sanitation and wastewater treatment. And you know, that's where a lot of these diseases, you know, half the children that die around the globe every year under the age of 5 actually dying from waterborne diseases. And those are easily taken care of as long as the sanitation's in place.
Yes, absolutely. And what we need is a global focus on solutions. What's unique about our summit is the format that we have. There's hundreds of conferences and meetings on water, but they tend to be sort of amongst the professional water community. And this summit will bring in the political and geopolitical forces, and both on the developing side, the poorer countries, and the richer countries who can be donor countries and helping the solution.
Well, looking at, of course, in our Rotary Club, I think there's about 83 embassies or actually ambassadors or actually members of our Rotary Club. But looking at it's been very interesting is where you have a number of the ambassadors coming from Africa, South America, and Asia. And then, of course, that's bringing in the ones from North America and Western Europe and some of the larger nations in Asia. So it really looks like it's a good balance. You don't have, one set of nations on one side versus the other. It looks like really it's covering the whole globe.
Yes, very much so. And even though we recognize that water is most pressing in terms of Millennium Development Goals in Africa and South Africa areas, there's a great interest in Eastern Europe and in Latin America. So it's exciting to see the participation we have.
Well, look at around the globe, there's about 195 cities that are sitting on these extreme earthquake faults. They're in areas where there's extreme weather conditions, and they're the largest population centers. So if anything happens there, and yet two-thirds of many of these cities, like Mexico City or Sao Paulo and places like that, people really don't have access to water, wastewater, and even power in those areas. So what you're doing, Don, through this International Water Summit is really, even though the focus is on water, it's really highlighting all these needs that we have around the globe. And it's really tough. You really almost have to address one or the other, because if you're trying to get water in many places, you have to have the power, whether it's alternative energy or electrical power off the grid, to bring that water to bear.
Yes, and that's actually one of the problems that we haven't faced very well. If you look at the use of water globally, about 10% of it goes to drinking water or potable water. Some 20% goes to energy development and production, and 70% goes to agriculture. Well, you have these nations that are developing. As they continue to develop, they will need increased agricultural water and increased power water. That means that we're going to be in a fight on the potable side to even have water to drink. And then with global warming coming along, if you're going to sustain your agriculture, particularly in some countries, it's going to require increased demand for that water. So there's going to be great competition for water in the future.
Well, looking at, I was 3 years ago in Bhutan, which is a tiny little nation, but they provide a huge portion of the water that goes throughout Southeast Asia. And meeting with the representative of the king and also the minister of energy, he said within 30 years we may be out of business as a nation. We may have to move our entire population, because the rainfalls do not provide the same sustaining water as we have out of the melting glaciers. And, of course, that's an accelerating rate. And 70% of the energy that they're exporting is going into two places, India and Bangladesh. 1.2 billion people in India, about 125 million in Bangladesh. So, it's a real problem, this whole notion of water. And looking at the ambassadors and then the specialists are going to be coming and talking, Don, what kind of practical solutions are they going to be sharing with us during that time?
Well, I think that we're not going to be solution-oriented, because there are immense areas in which we can explore. There's technology and things like that. But basically, all of those tend to be stopgap or short duration. To have sustainable solutions to water, we have to have a global solution, because the sharing of our global resource is going to be an immensely difficult problem. And as we will see in the future, I will easily predict that the cost of water will be much higher than the cost of oil in a few decades, and it will be a commodity that every human being will seek to have their share. And there simply isn't going to be enough to go around if we're not more prudent in the way we manage our water resources.
Well, and the whole thing is as you know, with the cheap price of water throughout the United States, Canada, many of the developed world, we're really not paying for the true cost as far as water is concerned, so a lot of it's wasted. And then in many of the developing countries, is how do you actually find what meager resources are there and then make it available to the people that truly need it? Because in most of your developing households, 6 to 7 people there, and they have about 3.5 gallons a day they're sharing. And in the United States, it's 75 gallons a day per individual. So it's a huge disparity between the use and availability, but a lot of that goes by price.
Yes. And it's unfortunate, but the water problem moves toward the area where poverty exists and health conditions, and so it exacerbates those kinds of problems.
Well, you know, the one thing, too, about looking at water, the generals and most every nation on Earth are really talking about this. The embassies are very much involved looking at the technologies and also trying to develop these policies through, you know, the various UNDP, Millennium Challenge Corporation, which we're going to have on, you know, with us and talk about what they're doing. But it really, as you said, it really needs to be a global addressing of this issue and make sure that we're doing it on balance so that no one's left behind, because if they are, just like in some places of Africa and the Middle East, it's nothing but war.
Yes. And in fact, there's a big recognition now that water is a national security problem for many nations. We saw recently at World Water Day that the president of the World Bank and our Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, both were very loud and clear that water is on the foremost thoughts of world leaders.
Well, we have about a minute and a half left, so let's just talk about what you see for the future going beyond just the conference. I know you're really working on the summit, making sure that's going to happen very effective and efficiently. But what do you see next after what's going on there?
Well, we hope this is the beginning. One of the things is this summit is running on a zero profit, if you will. Rotary is all volunteer, and so the net proceeds of this summit will go to a very large water project in Africa. But we expect that Rotary-wide, in our 1.2 million members, that we will encourage them to seek out larger projects and to look at more sustainable solutions for water. And more importantly, kind of to put Rotary at the table with all of the other major water policymakers.
Well, if you look at Rotary, 33,000 clubs, as you said, 1.2 plus million members all over the globe, 200 nations. There's not a place much on the earth where you can't find Rotary and its impact in local communities. And Rotary really works. You know, the emblem of the wheel, and that's a working wheel, really is true. We have about 15 seconds left. What would you like to leave with our viewers here and abroad?
I think that everybody who's a good citizen of this planet needs to get engaged in water. It's probably the most important problem we'll solve in the next few decades.
It's fantastic. Well, Don, I just want to say thank you on behalf of the Rotary Club of Washington, D.C., Rotary International, for what you're doing and all this, and then all the other major international NGOs, because we really have to address this issue. Thank you for being with us as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water.
At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site.
That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff.
You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Thank you for being with us on the Emerald Planet as we look around the globe in 143 different nations. Coming to you from Washington, D.C. as we try to find the best technologies, processes, people, and products that can be used to bring a higher quality of life. In this particular segment, we're talking about water, something that's a challenge. Over 1 billion people do not have access to clean and sufficient quantities of water. At the same time, almost 3.5 billion of the people, half of the globe, do not have access to proper sanitation. And so when we look at the whole notion of water and that topic is how do we balance between the water and the sanitation and then to draw in the power that's needed to provide it out to these developing countries and the communities, many of which are not connected to anything as far as the grid is concerned. And that's really the challenge of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, located here in Washington, D.C., but yet over 70 different nations looking how to bring a better quality of life. And Agnieszka Rawa is the Managing Director, Department of Compact Operations, Millennium Challenge Corporation, and formalizing on West Africa, correct?
That's correct.
And welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us here.
Well, we're really pleased to have the MCC, as is affectionately known around the globe. You talk with people at the United Nations, World Bank, IMF. Everyone knows about the Millennium Challenge goals that's been set out there.
And challenges.
And what is the MCC exactly? Give us a little bit about the background. Let's talk about some of the emphasis on water.
Very well. Well, the Millennium Challenge Corporation is actually a U.S. government corporation. And our mission is to alleviate poverty through sustainable economic growth. And we are not a relief organization. We give grants with the hope that countries will invest our money in ways to essentially help themselves and start up their economic engines.
Well, I think looking at this, the grants, you look, it's highly competitive. So you have nations really competing for these funds. And then what you're doing is you're really trying to invest the best practices. And of course, that's what Emerald Planet is all about as we go around the globe looking at these best practices and then highlight them, just like we're doing on television here. So what are some of the projects that you've really looked at in the water area, say over the last 4 or 5 years? We have some of the slides here. We're going to share some of those, but if you can just articulate some of that for us, that'd be great.
Of course. Well, I should first note that really our projects are driven by what the countries themselves ask for. A very strong principle of the MCC is country ownership. So the countries themselves propose the projects that they think are the biggest constraints to growth, and then they also implement them. So with that in mind, the types of projects in developing countries, not surprisingly, a number of them have focused on water. In 3 broad categories. First of all, of course, potable water access as well as sanitation, but also water for irrigation, because the poor will also benefit from irrigated areas that may have a higher productive yield as well as increased incomes for them. And last but not least, water resource management. We all know that increasingly water is becoming a global issue. So whatever use, whether it's potable or for irrigation or other types of activities the water is used for, we also need to look at the limitations.
Well, looking at that too, and this is the whole thing of resource management, resource development. Many of the countries, I've been in 74 now, and one of the big issues, of course, is forestry. Is that because of the lack of adequate fuels for cooking and fiber and all that, is that they really are taking and denuding the mountains of trees, just like in Haiti, where it's less than 2% of the total landmass has any type of foliage over it. So how do you balance that where you're looking at the projects that they're really asking for? We want water, but yet knowing that, well, you really need to have power, you need to have some kind of distribution system, even if it's donkeys and water bottles and other kinds of things. How do you balance that and so that you're really getting the best of the funds that are being given as a grant into these societies?
Well, we actually follow and encourage the countries to follow a pretty comprehensive process. The first step is a constraints analysis. So the countries conduct an exercise that allows them to determine where they can essentially get the biggest bang for the buck. Water may be part of it, but other types of activities may also...
could be power, could be distribution,
absolutely.
It could be whatever, right.
So water is just one.
Mm-hmm. Looking at water, is this one of the major thrusts that you have, particularly in West Africa? Or are there other thrusts, and this is complementary to that?
There are definitely other thrusts, although I should say that approximately 18% of all of the investments that we have made to date at the MCC are around water. So it's certainly important. In West Africa, there are also a number of investments in the agriculture area, also somewhat tied to water and complementary, as well as transportation and access to markets. So all these things comprehensively enable those countries to have stronger economies and eventually help themselves in helping their own poor.
Now, looking at the funds that are being provided as grants, what kind of match is there needed from the countries, or is there any match required whatsoever?
There definitely is an opportunity for the countries to provide their own money, and a number of them have to contribute and do contribute during the compact development process, during the process of conceptualizing these grants. And then there are also other donors that we try to work with so that whatever investment we make can be leveraged by them. And we're also increasingly trying to connect with the private sector since, as you know, there are also opportunities for synergies there.
Well, looking at this whole notion of the networking and cooperative relationships that you have in these different countries, it really is this balance between private sector, government, and of course through the MCC itself. What type of emphasis are you placing on this networking? Is there any facilitation that goes through the MCC, or do you actually leave that to the governments themselves to take care of that?
I would say both, and the emphasis is actually evident throughout both the development of these projects and the implementation. Another core principle that we live by is a participatory and consultative process. So during the process of developing these agreements with countries, they themselves will actually consult with their own civil society, ministries, other government agencies, and we will at the same time as well. So we bring in different opinions. We also identify opportunities for innovation and leveraging of funds. So this consultative process allows you to tap into all of these additional resources.
Well, I notice in your title here, it's all about the Department of Compact Operations. Now, that's really a glorious term. And this compact, what does a compact really mean? And then how do you interact with the governments? Because I know this is not an instantaneous process. So there's a lot of consultation that goes in, a lot of discourse back and forth, visitations between the United States and these different governments in these different countries. So how does this compact work, and how long can it last?
All right. Well, so compacts are essentially the name that we give to these grants. And the grants can be quite substantial. They can be anywhere from on the order of $100 million to up to $700 million.
That's real money.
It is. It's quite substantive. And of course, this amount of money needs to be expended by those countries within a very constrained amount of time, within 5 years. And the countries participate in the process of essentially deciding where they want this money to go.
Now, how do you, again, you hear about this whole notion of cronyism, corruption, and all these kinds of things going on, which just absolutely drives the Congress and the American taxpayer to distraction. How do we make sure that the money is actually going where it's supposed to be allocated? And then what are the benefits that are coming back, hopefully, to the United States for this type of investment?
Well, certainly the control of fraud and corruption is a major emphasis, both during the selection process of the countries. Countries, in order to be selected as eligible for our compacts or grants, have to pass a corruption indicator. So all of them have to have a commitment and a demonstrated performance on this indicators to show that they could manage the money well. But that's not enough. I mean, during the process of compact development and implementation, there are a number of safeguards that are in place to ensure that the money does indeed go directly to where it's supposed to go. And as far as benefits for the United States, once again, I think the idea here is that as our world is increasingly interconnected, what is good for the poor around the world eventually will be good for the United States as well. So it will benefit the United States on the long term that the developing countries are countries that promote free economies, just governments, and will hopefully also influence positively on our national security.
And bringing along the broad mass of the population, because you look at 3.5 billion souls, literally half of the world's population does not have access to proper sanitation, and then you have about a sixth of the world's population doesn't have access to water. All that just breeds war and disturbance and pestilence and everything else that's going on in these areas. And that's not good for anyone in the whole globe. As you're looking around, we have about 2 minutes left. As you're looking around the globe, what do you see coming up in the future as far as water is concerned? And what are some of the countries that maybe are taking a new thrust, a new focus in this whole area of water and in sanitation?
Well, it's evident that a number of our countries have already been requesting investment in this area. One of the newer countries that is essentially beginning their compact journey, Jordan, is investing a very substantial amount of money in sanitation and water treatment. Of course, it's a country that's very scarce in these resources. Now, more generally, in terms of water, I think what we are going to have to see is an even more comprehensive process of due diligence on the part of these countries, so that they're not only ensuring access to potable water and access to water for industrial processes and also their food growth and opportunities, but they will also have to select smart growth opportunities. So ways and avenues that lead to better resource efficiency and a longer-term outlook.
That's fantastic. We have about a minute left talking about the International Summit on Water in Developing Countries. Why is the MCC involved and interested in this? And what do you see this relationship between the MCC and Rotary International and others in the future?
Well, we
only have about 15 seconds.
Great. Well, we're very grateful that there is this emphasis on water. We think that raising the level of awareness on the importance of this issue is critical. So we are partners with the Rotary Foundation on that.
Well, we really appreciate you being part of this, because the MCC, as I said, is really a very famous organization now as we look around the globe. And it's very important that we all work together on this. And with the network that Rotary has, I think it can really help and foster what MCC is doing. And thank you for being with us as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture, of self. And now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs or to make a tax-free donation, contact C. Fripp at AOL.com.
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read. And may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America and Reading is Fundamental.
to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Thank you for being with us as we come to you from Washington, D.C., looking around the globe at those processes, the people, the technologies, and the products that can be used to bring about a better quality of life. One of the main issues that we have to talk about on a day in and day out basis is water. Water is really the essence of life, and without it, people cannot live. And of course, they cannot have a livelihood and cannot sustain the agricultural base or any aspect of their societies without a good, clean supply of water. And so through the International Summit on Water in Developing Countries, we're looking at the broad policy issues being located in Washington, D.C., that's going to affect not only North America and many of the developing countries, but the entire globe. All the nations need to be joined together in this most important topic. And we have someone who is a Peace Corps volunteer that worked overseas in water and sanitation. Her name is Doreen Salazar. And Doreen, when you were nominated to come on representing the United States Peace Corps, we had some people sent back instantly said, "Get her on TV. She's absolutely fantastic." So I just wanted to publicly share that with you. You have some adoring fans out there, and thank you for taking your time to be with us.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation.
Looking at the Peace Corps, just tell us a little bit about. I've known many Peace Corps volunteers over the years and stayed with them in the 74 countries where I visited throughout the world. Tell us a little where you were and what intrigued you and what drew you into Peace Corps.
Wow. I worked in Ecuador from 87 to 89. I was in the northern region, the province of Imbabura, and I was actually located out of a regional provincial office. What drew me into the Peace Corps was that I lived in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil between the ages of 12 and 16, and the American school there is right across the street from the slums, the favelas, and folks used to come and literally search our garbage for leftover food that we threw out. So that incredible disparity is what drew me into wanting to be in development work.
Oh, that is absolutely incredible. And of course, with the Peace Corps, now I understand almost half or maybe even more than half are actually people that are retiring, 50 years of age and older are coming in and getting involved. And when you're in there, it was actually almost all young people that were very much involved in what was going on in Peace Corps. So congratulations and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Actually, the majority of our volunteers still are young. We welcome and we have fabulous older volunteers, but the majority still are college
when
graduates.
When I was working in Jamaica, I think half of the volunteers there were all 50 years of age or older, and they were having a fabulous time.
Yes, certain countries we have more of them than others.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Well, this will be a recruiting program as well as talking about the International Summit on Water and also what's going on in Peace Corps. Looking at the various types of projects, of course you're here representing water. What are some of the other projects that Peace Corps gets involved in, and how does that then interrelate to this whole issue of water and providing water and sanitation, which is your background?
Right. We have 8,700 volunteers and trainees working globally in 77 countries.
I think that's an amazing number. I saw that when you sent that over. Over 8,000 people. It's incredible.
And they work in 6 different sector areas. We have agriculture, environment, small business development, youth development, education, and health. All of our volunteers get involved with community development type activities, and so I would say probably every volunteer gets involved in some form of education around the environment, around water, around hygiene. But specifically our volunteers, 24% of our volunteers are health volunteers, and they're trained to help people to improve their hygiene behaviors. I know we've talked so far on this show about water. We've also talked about sanitation, but along with those, the development community is always looking at hygiene behavior change as well, because it's been shown that hand washing behavior alone can greatly reduce diarrheal diseases as well as pneumonia.
Well, it directly relates to healthcare in all these areas, and of course, this is kind of the hidden project behind water and sanitation. Really, is healthcare, and then education is a component of that. But as I was traveling throughout India just a couple of years ago, going into the smaller villages, everywhere you go, you see these signs at the schools, at the post office, about how to wash your hands and how many seconds that you had to wash your hands. And it was about soap. It wasn't so much about, the water, the source of the water. And so where do these ideas come from, and how do you develop these and then be able to diffuse this throughout entire societies like a country as big as India with 1.2 billion people?
Right, and a great deal of work has been done in the health field regarding behavior change. It's not just about knowing what the pathogen transfer of disease is.
Or how to spell things with the proper Latin term. Okay.
People are motivated. Different age ranges are motivated in different ways. And as you can see here in the slides that are in the background, this is an activity that our volunteers in Costa Rica have promoted for several years now, painting the hands of the children. They have great fun, and then you put their handprints onto a big poster committing themselves to good hygiene behaviors, and then they got to wash their hands for those 30 seconds or that paint doesn't come off.
Oh, that's really neat. So you're doing this nationwide throughout. So what is the buy-in as far as the Ministry of Education, as they're known in most of these countries, the Ministry of Health, and then even economic development? How do all these work together so that Peace Corps is not just out there by itself on the edge and there's really no buy-in from the local governments?
Yeah, certainly. In every country that we are, we're there at the invitation of the government, and each of our sectors has a relationship with a government-level organization. Sometimes it's with the Ministry of Health, sometimes with Education, sometimes with both, sometimes as well with the Ministry of Water, so there are a variety of organizations that we work with. One of the greatest collaborations that we have is in Guatemala, where we have a collaboration with the Ministry of Education promoting a Healthy Schools program.
That is incredible. Now, Healthy Schools, tell us about that.
With the
What is Healthy Schools?
The Healthy Schools program, the volunteers are working with the school director to implement a program where they're looking at infrastructure. So you've got the facilities there, sanitation and hand washing facilities there. They're also looking at what the teachers are putting into their instructional materials as far as hygiene behavior goes. And then they're also looking at behavior change of the children. Are they washing their hands? Are they brushing their teeth?
Well, I think this is really neat because I came up being in the rural area of Virginia. We had 4-H was really the big project there. And so we learned a lot, hands, health, and health. And, we just, you needed to learn all these things, good cooking and processing and all that. So this is really a continuation. But what are we looking at here? Normally we just have the slides here as a backdrop, but tell us what we're looking at. These are two very different countries. And what's going on here?
Well, the left-hand side, or I'm not sure which side the viewers are seeing, but there's a program in Mali. They're also celebrating Global Hand Washing Day, which is celebrated internationally on October 15th every year, and just practicing washing their hands. Some of what our volunteers do with hand washing is they promote tippy taps, which are just portable places where you can store water safely and you can have it available to wash your hands. So here they're using not a tippy tap, but just something to pour the water onto the hands. And then the other side, that's a dry latrine. In the United States and other developing countries, these are being promoted as composting latrines. You separate the urine from the feces, and you do not waste water flushing toilets. So it's a way of sanitarily disposing of your feces without using water for water-scarce areas.
Now, in these countries, is this then going out into the land so you can build up the humus in the soils, or what is this waste being used
yes,
for?
Yes, it can be used that way. If it's handled properly over a couple of years, then it can be used safely.
Okay, and I know in many countries, I was in Nepal many years ago, and they were using it for methane production, using animal actually, in some places, human, and then also plant waste in all that. Looking at here is all about the radio, TV, reaching out to the populations, of course, in the schools as well. Tell us a little bit about the way that you're diffusing and getting this information out to the adults, besides going beyond the schools and the children.
Well, volunteers get involved with all kinds of community groups, and they work with health promoters who outreach to adults both at the health clinics but also household visits. And we have some volunteers who are involved with radio programs. So this photo just came in this week from Peru, where a couple of volunteers have a weekly radio program in their province. And last week, because of World Water Day, they focused their radio program on water issues, watershed management, water contamination, and hygiene behaviors as well.
Now, looking at the whole notion of the water and forestry and watershed development, what kinds of things are you looking at across the broad spectrum of Peace Corps in countries where, most of the forests have been removed, even the underbrush has been taken off to use for fuels and all that? How are you able to bring that back and how do you tie that into the education and to water as far as the schools and the various ministries that are involved in other areas besides forestry?
Yeah, we have volunteers who work both in our youth programs, in our education programs, and in our environment programs. Volunteers work to raise awareness around the issues of deforestation, to involve people in improving the environment. Volunteers come from the United States. We have such a great environmental movement in the United States. They don't need more technical training in that, and they bring that with them, and they find great interest on the part of the youth particularly in maintaining their environment and improving their environments.
Well, and so they're there actually as, if we can use this phrase right now, boots on the ground that are kind of the first line of offense, not defense, as far as working in these developing countries. Looking at these 8,000 plus, how many different countries is Peace Corps working in right now? And do you see that expanding in the future?
We're currently working in 77 countries. And we'll see. We sometimes may pull out of a country, may move into a new country. That'll depend on budget more than anything else.
Right.
But there is also a variety of issues related to going into a country, including volunteer safety.
Now, looking at the slides that we've gone through, we've seen a host of different areas as far as water and sanitation is concerned. What are some of the different technologies that you've identified that are low cost, effective, and are easily used within developing nations that our viewers here or around the globe may like to know about so they can use in their own country or be able to support, say, like Rotary or Lions, Kiwanis, any of these international civic clubs that may be able to use these in developing countries?
Yeah, most of the technologies that we're promoting are actually not that new. The simple pit latrine, the ventilated latrine, the composting latrines. Sometimes community members choose pour flush. That's what they want because it's less odorous, easier to maintain, and there might be a septic tank that they can connect to it, or they're connecting to a municipal system. On the water side, we're looking at spring captations, but we're also looking at rainwater catchment systems more and more, and that's one of the photos that you're seeing there. Mm-hmm. In Ecuador, that's a household, and we have a photo also from Panama, a school rainwater catchment system. That's a system we promote quite a bit.
So there's just many different technologies that are out there. Looking at these, they look like they're relatively low cost. And also one of the things that we talk about, they need to be toteable and portable so they can be moved house to house or within communities. Well, thank you for being with us, sharing about the Peace Corps. And we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.
Osama bin Laden calls getting nuclear weapons a religious duty.
Today, materials that can be used to make nuclear weapons are stored in more than 40 countries.
Sometimes protected by just a chain-link fence.
Yet not enough is being done to lock down these materials
before terrorists steal them.
Why did we learn all this?
My mother.
My son.
My sister-in-law.
Were all murdered September 11th.
Help protect America.
Together we can.
Please join us.
The stem cell issue is being debated throughout the country. Truth is, most everyone has an opinion, even if they don't know the facts.
Let's stop arguing and start really understanding the potential of stem cell research.
For us and for millions of Americans living with disabilities, get the facts.
Call 1-877-842-3442 for free information from the Stem Cell Research Foundation. That's 1-877-842-3442.
Following the tragic events of September 11th, there have been hundreds of violent attacks against innocent Americans.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
Remember, please stop the hate.
We're stronger when we are united.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
One nation, under God.
Indivisible.
With liberty
and justice
for all.
In America, there's either room for everyone, or it's not America. Don't pick the wrong fight.
Let's keep America land of the free.
Stop the hate.
Planning a home renovation? Put this at the top of your to-do list. Because after 10 years, none of you are protected against tetanus and another potentially fatal disease, diphtheria. A minor injury, such as a cut or a scrape, can put you at risk for a tetanus infection. And while safety gear offers some protection, an up-to-date vaccination called the TD Booster is the best insurance against tetanus. So get the TD Booster. If it's been 10, do it again.
Osama bin Laden calls getting nuclear weapons a religious duty.
Today, materials that can be used to make nuclear weapons are stored in more than 40 countries.
Sometimes protected.
Well, hello to you. Coming from Washington, D.C., this is the EmeraldPlanet. I'm Dr. Sam Hancock, the President and Executive Director of this nonprofit. And we're looking around the globe in 143 different nations, looking at what is happening, the products, the technologies, the processes, and the people that can bring a better quality of life to all citizens, all 7 billion souls around the globe and counting. And what we're talking about is water. But yet we have a special guest that's here with us, and this is the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, Peter Sawyer, and he's a Special Projects Coordinator. And Peter and his organization are going to be working with the International Water Summit in developing countries. And I would say you're probably an organization not people know a lot about, and so welcome. Glad to have you here. And tell us, what is the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting and some of its activities and the importance?
Okay, great. Well, the Pulitzer Center is a nonprofit international journalism organization, and our work is really in 3 parts. The first is awarding travel grants to journalists so that they can cover systemic crises around the world. And we kind of take a reporting campaign approach, so we'll identify a big issue and then sponsor several journalists over the course of years to cover the issue, create multimedia reports, films, videos, photography, blogs, that kind of thing. And so examples of that are maternal mortality, climate change, water, fragile states, women and children in crisis areas. So that's kind of the themes that we're looking at.
So you're really looking across the entire spectrum of society, looking at humankind, all the other beings within, also food production.
Right. We're trying to get, I mean, there's, with a lot of the stuff we see in the news is a consequence of underlying problems that don't get news attention when they're creating problems. It's so an issue like water and sanitation where, you know, folks are dying every day from lack of clean water, but it's not really a newsy kind of thing. You can't say 4,500 children died today because it's going to be the same headline over and over again. So we're
it's just systemic.
Right.
And the whole thing is, if you look at the Sudan, you look at Somalia, you look at the Middle East, Palestine, Israel, you know, a lot of this really boils down to water, resource allocation, how you're using those resources in the area. And based on just the name of what you described, it seems that what you want to do is you want to reach down into those topics, draw out the underlying causes of that, and then expose that to journalism all over the globe. So whether you're in Russia or the Sudan or South Africa or Guatemala or the United States, you understand what the issues truly are, and then how to address those.
That's right. And the way that we do that, the first is by working with mainstream media outlets here in the U.S. So that's organizations like National Geographic, it's The Economist, PBS NewsHour, and we're getting these stories out to the mainstream big public audiences. And on that side of it, that's the supply side. I mean, we all know that international journalism has been on the downhill with revenue cuts, but we're trying to fill that gap. And then we're also taking this work out to schools and universities across the U.S. and increasingly abroad as well, and trying to engage students on these issues that are really going to have a huge impact on their lives in the future, and get them to realize the importance of it, get them to be news consumers and start really thinking about these issues.
Well, looking at this slide we have here right behind us, we're looking at this montage of various images. What are we looking at here? And I know this is really, you have this here as a sample of some of the things you're providing to journalists and to mainline media all over the globe, regardless of what kind of government it is and what have you. Tell us what we're looking at here, and how is this a help to journalists around the globe?
Okay, great. So what we're looking at here is our downstream gateway, and we create gateways for each of the big topics that we're taking on. So this is the Gateway for Water and Sanitation, and it includes 17 projects that we sponsored over the past 3 years.
And each one of those are pictured here within this?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so each of those images represents a project. And
so what we could do is click on that image, and then that would take us, and that would just cascade all the way through the entire project?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there you'll see the whole range of material that's available on each project.
I tell you, that's just absolutely incredible, the resource that you're providing to the globe. And it's just the fact that we need to know a whole lot more about what you're doing and how you're doing it. Looking at these photographs, what is some of the importance of your work around the globe? We understand North America, you know, the very developed nations, but how is your work important in the developing world?
Okay, well, I think what we're trying to do is take an issue that, you know, isn't really acute for Americans. It's something that seems distant, so we're trying to make it real and kind of make them realize it's an issue in the world. You think that 40% of the world doesn't have adequate sanitation. That's just something that we're not thinking about. So what we're trying to do is raise awareness of these issues and to get people interested in them, but also to bring some scrutiny to the process of addressing the problem. Because if we have the public thinking about these issues and holding folks accountable, whether it's an NGO or a government, I think that's where we need the conversation to see change.
Well, what you're doing too is actually through these photographs and also making these montages available about these different projects, that you're actually leaping down into society through the internet, even through cell phones, iPhones, the blogs and all that, so that the average citizen, no matter whether they're in Uganda or the Congo or El Salvador, they're very much aware of what's going on in other parts of the world. And it's really this awareness is just what's going on now in the Middle East, is that more people became aware and said, look, maybe we need to have a change in what's going on around here. And so you're aiding and fostering that whole effort, correct?
Yeah.
Looking at what is the importance of, as far as the next efforts that you're going to be realizing for the center, and what may be next 2 or 3 topics that you're looking at this time?
Sure. Well, one of the initiatives that we've just started is with National Geographic and PBS NewsHour. And National Geographic is doing a year-long series on population issues, and the Pulitzer Center is commissioning supplementary pieces for NewsHour that were kind of loosely tied to what's happening in the magazine. And so we're trying to work together to raise awareness of population-related issues. One example of that for water and sanitation in Dhaka, Bangladesh, it's a city of 15 million people. 2/3 of them don't have access to sewers. So if you think of a city larger than New York, you know, saying, yeah, we're done with sewers, like we don't really need those anymore. That's what's happening in Dhaka, and the result is thousands of people dying every year. There's a diarrhea hospital there that sees 120,000 severe cases of diarrhea a year. That's just kind of unfathomable.
Just in the United States, it's just something that you go down to the pharmacy if you need it, and they give you a prescription. A couple of days later, you're okay. But looking at this young face right here, you know, almost 50% of the child deaths around the globe, and there's thousands of those a day, is due to waterborne illnesses, going back to this whole theme of water and why you're working with Rotary International and the Rotary Club of Washington, D.C. And those are easily treatable. They can be addressed for just literally pennies a day. So why, here we are in the 21st century, still talking about something that was, you know, highlighted in the 17 and 1800s?
Right. Yeah, I think it is. I think make a good point. 1800s. You know, everybody has dealt with anybody. You know, if you're not dealing with it now, then you dealt with it in the past. So this is a common issue that people everywhere have to deal with. I think, you know, we're still talking about it because it's not something that people want to talk about. It's not sexy. If you go in and if you're a politician, you don't want to get out there and start talking about poop and pee and how it's mixing them in with the water supply. You know, that's not really going to get.
It's definitely not sexy.
That's right. Sure. That's right. So I think it's really the funding is there. It's a great investment. You know, I think on for $1 of funding, you get $3 to $34 of return. So I think it's an issue of political will that folks worldwide haven't addressed.
This is the whole thing about, Peter. You're looking at this. You know, just talking amongst ourselves right now. Look around the globe and the trillions of dollars being spent on armaments, on war. And yet, if we would divert probably even 10% of that being spent on wars around the globe, they probably could stop many of the conflicts, the crises going on in Africa and some parts of Asia, South America. And it goes back to this political will and the focus that you have. So how do you think your center is really aiding that, so it keeps raising the bar as far as the discussion is concerned? And how long-term do you think you're having impact on this conversation?
Okay. Yeah, I think we're having an impact because we're getting the issue out there, and we're kind of an honest broker of this information. We're not an NGO. We're not a government. We're just trying to get these issues out there and get people talking about them. And so I think we're trying to add solid information out there and getting things that maybe folks don't want to hear about. For instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, about a third of water points that have been installed are broken. And
no, they're not maintained, and they say
right.
they're non-functional within roughly 3 to 6 months after it's put in.
Right.
So you have a population depending on the water. They're all excited, and then 3 months later, it doesn't work.
Right, and and I think that goes back to people needing information. If you're a donor and want to give money to an NGO that's addressing this issue, I mean, people need to know that they need to ask, what's your long-term sustainability plan, and how are you going to guarantee that this issue here, that this well here is not going to break down in 6 months. And so we're trying to get those questions out there, get the issue out there so people know to ask.
Now tell us a little bit about the funding and the background for the center, how it works. And just like everyone else, you need to be sustainable. So how are you sustainable, and how are you going to be around the next 10, 15, 20 years?
Sure. Well, about a third of our funding comes from the Pulitzer family, Emily Raw Pulitzer. And then we have another third or so from the Candida Foundation, and then the rest is smaller grants. And so we're raising money on an ongoing basis to support this work.
So you're just like the EmeraldPlanet and every other nonprofit. It's just fundraising is a constant factor, and we need to be very much involved in all this that's going on out there. Looking at the International Water Summit, how are you going to tie into that, and what's the importance of this summit, and how do you feel like that the two organizations, the Pulitzer and Rotary International, can complement each other?
Sure. Well, for the summit, we're going to be providing some videos to show during the summit itself to kind of give people a sense, get a picture to the words that they're talking about. We're also going to be recording interviews throughout the week that will be posted on our website. And so for folks, whether they're abroad or here in the U.S., can hear what these ambassadors have to say about the issue. And then we'll put together a kind of piece at the end to put it all together. So,
well, I think Peter Sawyer, Special Projects Coordinator for the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, thank you for being with us. And we look forward to working with you over the next few weeks. And we certainly want to talk with you about the EmeraldPlanet and the kinds of things that we're doing, because I think we complement each other. And thank you for being with us as we look around the globe to create the EmeraldPlanet.